of this conversation with Bishop Lawrence Provenzano of the Diocese of Long Island. Bishop, maybe I could begin by asking you, how long now has it been since you began your ministry here at Long Island?
Well, actually, here as we sit in the middle of June is the second anniversary of my arriving here in the diocese. After the election and before the ordination in September. September 19th of this year will mark the end of year 2 and the beginning of year 3. So it's been a very quick 2 years, filled with some challenges, but a very energetic time in the life of the diocese, and it's gone by very quickly. I'm almost surprised. At the end of each of the institution certificates or ordination certificates, I'm always reminded of what year I'm in, as it says the first year of my consecration or the second year, and the ones that are being prepared now say third year of my consecration, which is beginning to make me feel a little older.
You're growing into your time as a bishop, obviously. When you think of, I think everybody in the church who lives within the experience of church life has ideas about what it is to be a bishop, what the experience must be like. That goes, I think, for clergy and for laity alike. If you think back to your prior ministry, as a priest, and your interactions with the bishops, did you have your own preconceived ideas of what this experience would be like to be in leadership of a diocese?
Yes, actually, I not only had preconceived ideas of what this ministry would be like, but I had lots of opinions about how the bishops that I served were doing their job at various times. And I suspect I owe an apology to every one of those bishops now. Having done this for 2 years, I owe them some apology for being overly judgmental at how it must be so easy just to make decisions and do oversight and gather people around you and move forward with life and ministry in a diocese. It is much more complicated than anyone looking from the outside, even if you're looking from within a circle of advice or those kinds of connections, to really understand what it feels like to be that person. Or as my son Chris would say, of course, you're always the guy sitting in the room with the pointy hat. But it does have some effect on how you make decisions and those kinds of things. And I think it looks like, it is the best job in the church, and I will tell you that having done this now for 2 years, it is the best job in the church. I mean, I enjoy the ministry that I'm doing. My reflection on almost 30 years of parish ministry before becoming bishop, it's pretty clear to me that a fair amount of what I did as a parish priest is not translatable to serving as a diocesan bishop. Although pastoral inclinations, kind of an understanding of how to deal with people, structures within the church, all of those kinds of things are built upon those experiences of being in a parish and doing parish ministry. The truth is that day in and day out, the ministry of a bishop is very different than the ministry of a parish priest. It is not kind of, well, you've got one priest, one parish, so you have one bishop, one diocese. It just is, a larger group of people, or, it's much more complicated, and the relationships are very different. And that has taken a little getting used to. I've come to realize very quickly that as is taught in the College for Bishops, or commonly understood as baby bishop school, there are no casual conversations. And everything you say has at least 3 or 4 interpreted meanings. And I'm still learning that lesson, as at times I'll say things to people and think, oh gosh, how are they going to respond to that, or what's the thinking behind that, or and so I'm a bit more careful, or at least I try to be careful about making statements and those kinds of things, which is part of the learning curve. I suspect when I'm getting to the end of my ministry as bishop, I'll eventually get to a time when I've gotten it right, finally. But right now, it's still the growing edge of doing this work.
Is part of the learning curve then the way, I mentioned before about people also having preconceptions about what it is to be the bishop, the way people see you in your role, you have to learn that.
I could be a rich man if I had a dime for every time someone says, well, you're the bishop, just make it happen.
Yeah.
And that's just not the way the church operates, particularly this branch of the church. There is a lot of preconceived understandings of the role the bishop can play in a lot of situations. And oftentimes they are, there's a misunderstanding about the way oversight is done. I'm always being very mindful of the fact that I want to encourage vestries in parishes to make decisions for themselves and not for the diocesan structure to somehow impose itself upon our parishes. And that's caused a little bit of confusion because I think some bishops at times can spend a bit of time pushing at decision-making in parishes in ways that I don't feel I really want to take on at this point, in the sense that I would much rather, for instance, if there's a vacancy, for a congregation to really do the hard work of dealing with whether or not they can afford a full-time priest and keep their buildings and do the mission they're called to do, rather than to say, well, let me steal that back from you. We'll help you make some decisions, and here, we'll get you a priest, and have this kind of influence over the life of a given congregation. The other piece is that I every once in a while, and it's a joke here amongst the staff, every once in a while I will invoke in the midst of a conversation, well, excuse me, but I actually am the bishop, you know, and then everyone kind of remembers that you know, we're all playing various roles in this ministry. Right. I try to take that role as seriously as is needed for the life and ministry of this diocese, at the same time not having everyone take me so seriously that there can't be some sense of camaraderie and collegiality in the life of the diocese, and particularly amongst the clergy. Oftentimes in dioceses, particularly large dioceses like ours, the bishop is isolated, and it creates a little bit of a him and us kind of situation, and that is true in a lot of large dioceses, and that the ability for us to somehow create collegiality, particularly with clergy leadership and vestries in parishes, has become an important part of my work in these last 2 years.
What ways do you see yourself doing that thus far, creating that collegiality?
If I'm coming to a parish on a Sunday for a visitation, I will spend an evening the week before, either a Tuesday or Wednesday evening, with the clergy and the vestry of that parish. And under the umbrella of doing the official visitation, signing the record books and all that, doing the inspections of all of that stuff, but to really engage the leadership of the congregation in a conversation about how we can work together. There has been in this diocese, for a very long time, going back decades in this diocese, a sense at which everything kind of flowed out of Garden City and the bishop's office. And what I've been trying to create in these last 2 years is a real notion that the people here who are part of the staff of the diocese are a servant ministry to all the parishes and missions of the diocese, because they are the places in which ministry happens. And that's been a real shift. And even articulating that and then kind of living it out in my relationship with the parishes has become an important work. It's really one thing for a new bishop to say a lot of things and to set agenda. It's a very different thing and very time-consuming and a great deal of work to make that happen, to really show up at all those places and to keep the schedule that allows for that in nearly 150 congregations.
I heard you once at a confirmation in a parish, as you preached, invite the young people being confirmed, but I heard you inviting the congregation beyond their number 2 to a revolution, I believe was the term you used that day, and you may use it other times as well. But I think I've heard some of what you're saying already in that, but what might be some of the other terms of that revolution that you're talking about? I guess in terms of maybe how faith is lived, how church is understood in our times and going forward.
I think it's essential that every one of our congregations sees themselves at the church at work in the midst of the neighborhoods and communities in which they live. The revolution that I'm inviting people to is to have the church affect every aspect of the lived experience of a particular community. That if we have a parish in the middle of Brownsville, then Brownsville ought to be affected by what happens in that congregation. That every baptized member of that congregation has some place in the life of the wider community. And that we not abdicate all of those roles to either civil authorities or some other kind of programming, that in fact we be the church. So that was part of that revolution. I've gotten to the point where at some point in almost every one of those confirmation sermons, I invite people to join me in this revolution, in which I am naive enough to think that we can actually change the world. That what's really going on in the world today, when people live in a mindset of what's in it for me, or dog eat dog, that if we really live out the baptismal covenant, which is at the center of every one of those confirmation liturgies, that if we lived into it, we really lived into it, that we could change the world. That Christians living as Christians in the midst of the wider congregation are not there to convert people, but they're there to be the church. They're actually there to do ministry with and for people. And I think that I'm pretty clear about the fact that in all the time that I'm going to be diocesan bishop of this diocese, that's going to be the primary work of ours, is to change the world. Now, I go a step further. I am actually bold enough to be saying to our congregations that although I have great respect for all of our ecumenical partners, I don't understand why everyone's not an Episcopalian. We've got the long tradition of Catholic faith. We've got a long tradition of the evangelical and missionary fervor of the life of the church, and that I would hope that the one thing that will happen when it's time for me to retire as bishop of this diocese is that the 53,000 Episcopalians we have now will be 106,000. There are more people in all of our communities who are unchurched or underchurched, who need a relationship with Jesus Christ. And I think we can provide that. I think we need to be bold enough to imagine that we can provide it, because that's really the call of the baptismal covenant. It's really not about keeping all of our buildings open. It's really not about real estate. It's not about program in as much as the program feeds the congregation, but really about individual Christians living out their baptismal covenant in the midst of the communities in which they live. That's been kind of a basic theme throughout all of this. It's part of my idea of a revolution. And it actually came, that concept of revolution came when I realized that there were too many in the church, the wider church, that were focusing on survival. I don't want the Diocese of Long Island to be focused on survival. We don't need to survive. We need to be the church. We need to be on mission. And all the rest of it will happen by God's grace and the work of the Holy Spirit if we're just being faithful to that mission. We don't need to worry about getting people into the pews. Some people will come and sit in our pews if we're doing mission. But more importantly, we need to do work with the wider community. One of the incarnations of that has been the thrust in some of the in some of our larger parishes, particularly, but a call to the entire diocese for us to adopt the schools that are within our geography of each parish. Again, not proselytizing, not trying to make Episcopalians, but if the local public school knew that the local Episcopal church in early fall was going to provide 150 winter coats, No questions asked, no proselytizing, nothing stuffed in the pocket saying, gee, come to such and such a church. But just that we did that because we're caring for the fact that children in that neighborhood might show up for school in late fall and early winter without winter coats. That our parishes open up their parish halls and their churches and their undercrofts in those weeks in the school year when there's school vacation and people really can't afford to send their kids off for a week in one place or another, and that we begin to have this kind of conversation with the local school saying, you know, St. John's or St. Mary's or whatever the name of the church is down the street is going to have its parish house open. There are going to be enough adults supervising activities so that way parents know that they don't have to scramble for childcare during those school break weeks in February or in April or whenever they happen within the school year, and that we really be of service, we be a partner in the communities in which we find ourselves. And then, of course, if that's the case, the local principal, the local guidance counselor knows that there are safe adults that can be mentors or tutors for students free of charge. It becomes part of the ministry of the local congregation. And so this concept of our being able to adopt the local public schools is just one more incarnation of our living within the boundaries of our parish settings. In a sense, it's a really old-fashioned thought. You know, do ministry where you're planted.
Right. It seems as if you're saying, too, that everything we have, that is people, their talents, but resources in terms of buildings or space or time or the ability to give, like the coats, all those, everything we have are all tools in the mission, part of the ministry, potentially at least. We just take them and use them.
Well, we take them and use them, but I also think that they're not used as carrots either. It isn't the carrot at the end of the stick, well, you get a winter coat if you come to church.
Right.
Which I think was really an old model of evangelism, was that, you know, there was a kind of back and forth, well, you get something, but we expect that you're going to come to church. This needs to be the church just being the church. We have young kids in our communities that are going to school who don't have winter coats, or don't have shoes, or don't have pajamas to wear. We got to be providing those kinds of things without any expectation that they're going to come and darken the door.
Right.
I think for too long the church has spent way too much time and way too many dollars on trying to proselytize and get people into church, as if the only thing the church is doing is Sunday morning. You know, the Sunday morning experience, liturgical experience of celebrating the Holy Eucharist is really the icing on the cake. It is the important central focus of our life. It feeds us sacramentally in word, sacrament, but all of that because we're supposed to be on mission, not as if that's the be-all and end-all of our experience. And I think for too long we've been focusing on a survival mode that has us thinking that that's what we've got to do, and by the way, while they're there, they better pay their pledge. We would never ever have to worry about pledging and getting people to support the life and ministry of the church if we were actually just being the church. We would have more money, at least I believe we would, have more money, more resources, and more people than we could ever hope or imagine.
Now, I wanted to ask you, we've been talking generally about the life of the church, its mission. One specific I wanted to talk about a little bit, at this point, months before it's going to happen, but you've begun to talk about, I know you did at the last clergy day, gathering the diocese, in effect, in the Easter season next year around Pentecost on the grounds of the Cathedral and Mercer School at Garden City for a kind of a diocesan convocation. Could you say a little bit about why you think that's important and what your hopes are for that day as we look forward to it? Because I think it's important. It's a big thing, I think, as you envision it, and so we need to think about it even now, in June of
Yeah, we need to be planning now for what may happen next Pentecost. Is right. My thinking around the concept of convocation is the diocese had a tradition that was called Cathedral Day. And parishes would literally bus in people to come onto the grounds of the cathedral, and there would be picnics, and it was a time of fellowship within the life of the diocese. That old image of what used to happen in cathedral days, coupled with all of the enthusiasm that was focused around the time of my Episcopal ordination, in which 190 people came to sing in the choir, and several thousand people came out for the actual liturgy, that I can hear as I go around the diocese the need for those kinds of experiences to be replicated on a diocesan level. And then the third thing was the wonderful work that was done by the Department of Program and Services, in which there was kind of a ministry fair early in September. And as I talked with people in diocesan council and the clergy and lay folk that were involved in program and services, that all three things could come together, and that we could have a diocesan-wide convocation in which there would be workshops focused on the needs of congregations to look at certain aspects of our life and ministry together, some opportunity for learning and fellowship. Food, of course, is an important part of the cross-cultural experiences, of the multicultural experiences of this diocese, and then to have the day end with a celebratory liturgy, a Eucharistic liturgy, in which everyone in the diocese would be present on the eve of Pentecost. We're focusing on the Saturday before Pentecost in 2012. All of that by way of accomplishing a few things all within the same day. The fellowship piece, the large liturgical experience here on the grounds of the cathedral, educational events in order to feed the life and ministry of congregations, and to begin to cross-pollinate, where something that may be working in a parish in Bed-Stuy can be fed to a parish in Great Neck here in Nassau County, and something from out in Suffolk County working with some parish in Queens, and that those connections can be made over a day. This kind of monumental undertaking envisions thousands of people from around the diocese coming to the campus of the cathedral. We may need, particularly in terms of the planning, may need to talk to our neighbors at Adelphi and ask them for some space, for breakout space. We can't house it all here at Mercer or in the Cathedral House. And that, contrary to what happens at convention, as important as convention is for us, in which we spend some time doing some of the same kind of fellowship and prayer time, that is very deliberative in the sense of we're taking votes and there are resolutions, and we're voting on people to represent us at conventions and those kinds of things, that convocation wouldn't have any of that legislative feel to it. That this would really be about the mission and ministry of the diocese. And then we'd have a lot of fun together. The one thing I know about this diocese is that when we're together, we love to have fun together. It's an amazing thing when you get large groups of members of our diocese from across the diocese together. It's fun. You know, even when we're dealing with tough things, we're dealing with a deliberative session in convention, it's still a fun event for everyone. The thing I love most about this diocese is that when everything else is peeled away, the people of this diocese really love each other. They really like spending time together. They're cooperative with one another. They're supportive of one another. And I just want to build on that momentum. Again, because I think that we've got an opportunity right now in this diocese to really move forward in mission. And I think this is a way to really prime that pump. So convocation, the Saturday before Pentecost, is going to be a big deal. And the diocese ought to get ready for it. We're going to need buses. We're going to need to do a lot of coordinating. It's going to make all of the other things that we've done up until this point look small compared to the undertaking of doing this.
Great, exciting times.
It is very exciting. I think, again, that it's an exciting time to be the bishop of this diocese. The opportunities are tremendous, and cooperation in the life of the diocese is tremendous. And so, and as time moves on, there's more and more coming in all of the work of our diocesan life. What I'm discovering as I move through the diocese, not only with parishes, but with our healthcare system, with community services, with Camp de Wolf, with the School of Theology here at Mercer, and our cathedral, all there is opportunity. Every place we look, there's opportunity for growth, there's opportunity for mission, and so we're going to try to make the most of it.
Great. Thanks for your time today. Look forward to speaking to you soon again.